Bush was gifted with and cultivated a subtle mind, attuned to the interplay of government and the private sector. Specifically, he cautioned that government support for R&D must encourage private support, not crowd it out. He stated, quote, "These private sources should continue to carry their share of the financial burden." However, other than his tax deductibility for R&D idea, he gave us no specific proposal for how that might be accomplished. We'll return to that theme later when we consider potential paths for reform. Likely foreseeing the competition with the Soviet Union, Bush also emphasized the importance of research to long-term military preparedness. He was especially keen to see the nation's research scientists focused on, quote, "far-sighted technical lines," end quote. You can almost imagine thinking of the possibilities of DARPA and NASA 10 years before they would become a reality, immediately after Sputnik in 1957. Bush grasped the inherent tension between the academic freedom and collaboration so necessary to technological advance and the wartime needs of keeping scientific research of military significance classified. However, he came down squarely on the side of the need for broad dissemination of basic science research during peacetime, while recognizing the need to protect sensitive military-related applications. His simple point was that a sounder foundation for a national security lies in a broad dissemination of scientific information upon which further advances can be readily made and our advantage against our adversaries sustained or extended. Bush also recognized the risks of abstracting science and research from the people actually doing the work, the scientists and the researchers. He noted in particular the contribution of President Conant of Harvard, who's pictured here on the right, to the work of the report when he wrote, "I cannot improve on President Conant's statement that, quote, in every section of the entire area where the word science may be properly applied, the limiting factor is a human one. We shall have rapid or slow advance in this direction or in that, depending on the number of really first-class men who are engaged in the work in question. So in the last analysis, the future of science in this country will be determined by our educational policy." Linking the success of our scientific research and development to our educational policy raises some interesting questions and possibilities for reform, which we will return to in a little bit. Bush concluded his report with 5 principles for a successful new agency that is devoted to basic science and research, which would later become the National Science Foundation, or NSF. First, this agency needs to provide stable long-term funding over a number of years to enable longer-term projects. Second, it must hire personnel who understand what Bush referred to as the peculiarities of scientific research and education. Third, such an agency, and this is one of the most important points, I think, should not run its own labs. It should make contracts and grants only. Bush sensed that an agency focused on or biased towards supporting its own labs would risk insular thinking and fail to identify the latent scientific talent across a wide range of institutions so necessary for scientific advances. Fourth, the agency must provide support to institutions but avoid seeking to control their decisions on policy, personnel, method, and scope. He concluded that the agency must maintain accountability to Congress and the President, which is necessary in a Democratic or Republican form of government. After Bush's report, beginning in 1945, the funding of science and research by the federal government continued to develop apace. Congress established the National Science Foundation, the agency that Bush had advocated for in 1950. The next major step, however, forward for basic science and research funding at the federal level occurred after the Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957. As Americans and our leaders sought to avoid falling behind the Soviets in areas of critical technological and strategic importance, Congress, if you can believe it, in remarkable haste, or one might say responsiveness, established NASA and DARPA in 1958, just the year after Sputnik launched. The space age and the internet age would eventually follow. The atomic age and the Cuban Missile Crisis raised the stakes for preparedness for a nuclear attack. Some far-seeing scientists and researchers grew concerned that our communication systems were not sufficiently resilient or survivable in a nuclear attack. With the financial support of Rand, Paul Barron published on distributed communications in 1962, outlining a packet-based distributed communications network which offered the conceptual framework for the ARPANET, which would become the Internet and eventually the World Wide Web. The Internet would, of course, transform communications and reduce the transaction costs, something that Ronald Coase would appreciate, for scientists and researchers to collaborate not only in the US, but around the world. So as we come up to the 1980s and 90s, the federal budget for science and technology is growing ever larger. Policymakers and the National Academies of Science and Engineering are growing concerned that federal funds for science and technology are not being allocated properly. In issuing their report in 1995, these academies sought opportunities for improvement in the efficiency and efficacy of R&D funding and emphasized some of the same observations that Bush had highlighted 50 years earlier in Endless Frontier. Specifically, they noted the interplay of basic science and the development of innovative companies. Quote, Sun Microsystems and Silicon Graphics among computing companies, and Amgen and Genentech and biotechnology did not exist 15 years ago. All were started from a base of academic science supported by the federal government. Now, perhaps they're taking a little bit too much credit for the research done in the federal government, but they're making an important point about the interconnection between the two. This 1995 report also sought to address another concern that is just as relevant today, are the benefits of research spending flowing to foreigners instead of for the benefit of Americans and our general welfare and common defense. The report rebutted this concern by stating, history suggests instead that where research takes place has a direct effect on where it is put to use. The high technology firms clustered along Route 128 in Massachusetts, in Silicon Valley, in suburban Maryland, in Austin, Texas, all congregated around major federally supported university or government research centers. The report continued, if industrial use and centers of capital were the decisive factors, the foremost centers of biotechnology and computer firms should have located instead near Tokyo, Frankfurt, Paris, London, or New York City. However, one might question a little bit some of the conclusions. The relative decline of Route 128 as an IT corridor and the rise of Taiwan as the chip-making capital of the world certainly calls into some question whether some of these conclusions require revision. The same could also be said about the growth of China's R&D enterprise, which has sometimes come through research and industrial espionage, including the incidents and allegations involving Huawei. The 1995 report continued with a warning to complacent scientists and those that fund them. Over time, institutions and programs have been created that no longer serve us well. Even good programs and institutions must give way to successors that are better and are more closely linked to new national needs. Now, this process of replacement of the old by the new naturally happens in the business world through the processes of creative destruction outlined by Joseph Schumpeter in his 1911 book, The Theory of Economic Development. However, long-standing federally funded research projects have a way of staying in the budget, diverting funds away from planting the seeds for the next generation of important advances that often lack access to the channels of influence at the NIH or at the NSF. While it advocated for reforms in the allocation of science and research funding, the report also reminded readers of the same point made by Bush 50 years earlier, that major advances in science have often come from unexpected sources. The 1995 report cited some important contemporary examples of how the fundamental research on atomic clocks paved the way for the GPS system, how the work on the microwave spectrum of ammonia enabled the development of lasers, and how the studies of magnetic moments and nuclear spin spawned the rise of MRI technologies. However, by 2013, it had become increasingly clear that the gears of federally funded scientific research were gumming up with new regulations and process requirements generated by the federal funding agencies, as a report by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine made clear. The report stated, though well-intended and undoubtedly appropriate, federal oversight and its accompanying burdens raise significant questions about whether the nation is optimizing its investment in our extraordinary research enterprise. The report continued, in this vein of concern. Quote, the government-academic research partnership is under stress. Concerns have been raised repeatedly that federal laws, regulations, rules, policies, guidances, reporting requirements, while essential to a well-functioning, responsible system of research, have led over time to an environment where a significant percentage of an investigator's time is spent complying with regulations, taking time away from research, education, and scholarship. I recall George Gilder speaking earlier today on time. In this case, the investigator's precious time as the essential economic scarcity. Echoing similar themes, a memorandum from the chairman of the National Science Board of the NSF in March 2014 stated, for more than a decade, surveys and reports have highlighted an increase in administrative and compliance requirements associated with federal research. There is now consensus that some of these requirements are interfering with the conduct of science out of proportion with the accepted need to ensure accountability, transparency, and safety. One can only imagine what new burdensome requirements may have arisen since that report 10 years ago, including some entirely unrelated to the pursuit of truth and excellence with integrity in the scientific enterprise.